So I don't do this very often. It's been almost 3 years, I think. But I'm going to make a video about why Scott Morrison's holiday to Hawaii at this time of national emergency matters, and why people who are saying it matters are not just motivated by politics and a desire to embarrass him politically. I'll deal with the arguments defending Morrison one by one and explain why they're not very good. So the first argument is everyone needs a holiday. I completely agree. I don't think many people would disagree with this. The problem with this argument is that Morrison has already been on 2 holidays already this year. In January he went to Shoalhaven Heads, and in June he went to Fiji. So it's not like he has gone a long time without a holiday and really needs one. Especially when you consider that he's being paid $500,000 a year of taxpayer money. It really matters how much work you do when you're being paid that much money a year from taxpayers. The trade-off of making $500,000 a year is that you're going to be doing more work than someone who is making 200 or 100. It's a few orders of magnitude more. So it's not unreasonable for us to expect him to be doing more work. Again, I agree people need a holiday because when you have a holiday, that allows you to do more and better work later on. But this is a bad time for it. I think Morrison's learned the hard way this month what leadership actually means when it comes to times of crisis. He only became Prime Minister in August last year, and this is the first real massive emergency he's had to deal with since he became Prime Minister. And what it means, and he found this out the hard way, is that when there is a massive crisis and you are leader, it means service, it means sacrifice. It means dropping everything, or almost everything, that is not important and turning your attention to the crisis at hand to deal with it. That sometimes includes putting off plans that you had made that you were looking forward to, right? There's a reason that leaders are expected to do things other people aren't. It's because they're leaders. It's because leadership is about service and sacrifice. Isn't that what it means to have leaders to begin with? The trade-off between reward and service. We will give you more reward, we will pay you more money for it, but we're going to expect in return that you're going to show a bit more than other people, and you're going to sacrifice a bit more than other people. And yes, that even includes if his family is involved. I think it's a pretty sad thing when politicians can't see their family for extended periods of time, as they often do. The problem is, though, they've made a decision that that's the life they want to live. And if you make that decision, you have to either change your mind, in which case you should resign, or see it through. You can't see through the decision of successfully becoming Prime Minister and then not being willing to make the sacrifices that incurs. If he were to come out later today and say, I can't do this anymore, I want to be with my family, it's too much time, I didn't realise what I would have to do, I'd have great respect for him for that. But he can't have it both ways. We're entitled to an effective, good leader, Prime Minister, and we don't have to throw that away just because Morrison has things he'd rather be doing. So the second point I've seen made in defence of Morrison is, oh well, if he was in Hawaii it doesn't matter because he couldn't be doing anything effective to fight the fires anyway. Well, first that begs the question of, if his absence makes no difference, why do we need him at all? Let's just get rid of him and let's just get rid of the role of Prime Minister. I don't think that is a viable option for the country, but if you're making that argument, it does beg that question. The second problem, of course, is that it's just demonstrably untrue. I think common sense intuition tells most people that when there's a national emergency where fires are affecting the whole country, vast swaths of the country, this is an issue that federal leaders need to take an interest in. But I understand that you can't just rely on common sense intuition to make a logical argument alone. So I've got Guardian columnist Badham here in her brilliant comment to make this argument. She's talking to someone on her Facebook page who was defending Morrison, and she says, well, I did put together a policy action plan for rehousing those made homeless through government investment in portable housing. I tried to convene meetings with the CSIRO, Landcare and other land management stakeholders to discuss development of an immediate revegetation plan. I called an emergency meeting of Cabinet demanding every minister get back to me by Monday with a strategy for fast-tracking climate mitigation strategies, tried to organise a meeting with the fire chiefs to establish a fire prevention strategy framework, to inform all government decisions from this point so I could, on their advice, deploy the Australian military in the emergency. I also tried to contact the state government leaders to coordinate an immediate fire management conference where everyone can be presented with best practice strategies for fire prevention in order to get a bipartisan commitment that recommendations, including those from the Black Saturday Royal Commission, become an enforced national standard. I wanted to get on the phone and personally bawl out Gladys Berejiklian for her complete political failure to manage this crisis, and threaten both her premiership and her pre-selection unless she got her thumb out of her bum and reallocated resources immediately to National Park Fire Protection and the Rural Fire Service. Oh, and then I went to a number of evacuation centres and provided empathy and contact to fire victims so they knew that the government had their back. Alas, I couldn't do any of these things because, unlike Scott Morrison, I am not the fucking Prime Minister. I will add one more thing to Badham's list there, which is that one of the things that has been happening as fires become more and more serious is international cooperation in firefighting. So it's become more common that we will bring in a lot more firefighters from overseas to fight fires when we have them, and then we'll send our own firefighters out when those countries have them, right? That kind of international arranging and coming to an agreement is only something that can be done at the federal level, right? In fact, it's not the exact point, but signing treaties is actually an executive power, not merely a federal legislative power. So when you're doing that kind of arrangement, it does highlight the unique and special role of the Prime Minister specifically, right? So that is another thing that he could be doing to help coordinate a response to these fires, that when you're in Hawaii and you don't know, and you're removed from the situation, and you don't know exactly what you need, and you can't discuss how you're going to get the resources, and you can't discuss how you're going to pay those countries back. When you're in Hawaii, it does make it difficult to do that important task as well. And it should be needless to say, but I'll say it anyway, you can't really do this kind of mass coordination by video conference. You need to be talking to people directly and getting people together physically in the same place. A lot of these conferences involve things like everyone's looking at maps, everyone's watching video presentations of the situation, reading through important documents and reports, and they're reading through the same stuff and watching the same stuff. You kind of need to be in the same room to do that effectively and be on the same page with each other and understand what the other people are looking at and understanding. I've also heard some people say that because firefighters themselves haven't come out publicly and said, we regret that Scott Morrison isn't here, we need him, we can therefore infer from this that they're okay with him being away and they recognise that it wouldn't have made a difference. Now, you can take that view, of course. I don't personally agree with it, but I understand why people might be inclined to take it. But what I want to do is show that there is actually another side of this coin. There is another opinion on this matter from authoritative emergency management people themselves. So this is an article that was published in 7 News on Tuesday, and it's got quotes from members of a group called Emergency Leaders for Climate Action, and I've heard people dismiss this group's positions just because they're in favour of climate action. I even heard one person say that Morrison's refusal to meet with this group earlier in the year didn't matter because they're opposed to him and his, more specifically, his ideas for climate change specifically. Therefore, it's somehow not a scandal that Morrison refused to meet with them because, of course, he's not going to meet with people who disagree with him. Now, of course, if you're refusing to meet with people who could potentially have life-saving information and ideas heading into an emergency because of politics, that's more of a scandal, not less, but that's a matter for another day. Anyway, so the first quote I'll read you is from Greg Mullins. He's the former Fire and Rescue New South Wales Commissioner, and he says this: I hope the Prime Minister will suddenly show some national leadership and say, yes, I get it and I can see it and we'll get people together to deal with the crisis. But I don't see any suggestion that's going to happen. They really are missing in action. And we continue to former ACT Emergency Services Authority Commissioner Peter Dunn. He says, the fires in those circumstances will be difficult to control, talking about as climate change bites harder, the nature of fires. The thing that comes through all the time is we need to coordinate at a national level new methods of firefighting. Business as usual doesn't work, and we need a roundtable to get that sort of thinking with all agencies involved. And then finally we have former Tasmanian Fire Service Chief Mike Brown. He says, fires don't recognise state boundaries. We need services to be able to adapt to this new normal. We are seeing major losses at the moment, and we are only a week into the summer. There's some urgency on this. So there is a strain of thought among emergency authoritative people that yes, it does matter what the Prime Minister does. It does matter that he's away, and we need him to have a role in coming up with plans to deal with what is happening. So if you want to point to the Rural Fire Service firefighters who aren't commenting publicly and infer from their non-comment that Morrison's okay, you can do that, but just keep in mind there actually do exist those people that you may have overlooked. So the final argument, and it's not really an argument, it's just lashing out in desperation, is that people who are criticising Morrison are themselves morally bankrupt because they're just politicising a tragedy. Someone told me, well, there have been all of these other issues going on in the fires, why haven't you been talking about them? I've been posting for over a month about a myriad of issues relating to the fires. I've been posting about what is the role of not enough backburning, and what is the role of the resulting having too much fuel on the ground to make the fires worse. What is the role, of course, of climate change? Have there been budget cuts to certain government agencies? What has the effect of those budget cuts been? And this week, the controversy turned to what is the role of the national political leadership on this issue, and what can be done at that level to make them better? And is it a problem when the national leader goes on holiday in the middle of a national emergency? So I talk about these issues as they come up. I talk about them when they need to be talked about. I will not ring-fence this issue from discussion because the effect of it is that someone has been embarrassed politically. Now, scoring a point against Morrison and for Labor is not my priority here, although I think some embarrassment to him is probably the inevitable side effect. But if you're saying that this is the one issue that you shouldn't talk about because a person has been embarrassed, this is how that sounds in practice. Can we talk about climate change? Absolutely. Can we talk about budget cuts? Absolutely. Can we talk about lack of backburning? Absolutely. Can we talk about the need to coordinate national firefighting services as opposed to having them just state-based in the future? Absolutely. Can we talk about the role of the federal national political leadership in making that happen, and why it's a problem when they're away on holiday and that might get in the way of them making it happen? No, you can't talk about that. You disloyal, unpatriotic, politicised, uncaring, unfeeling, don't care about the victims, only care about your own party. You get the point. It's a ridiculous argument to say this is the one thing you shouldn't talk about. This is the one thing that's irrelevant. Really? A truly effective response to a problem considers all avenues of dealing with it. As we all know, that is a point Morrison himself made in 2010 when he criticised then Police Commissioner of Victoria, Christine Nixon, for going out to dinner on Black Saturday, quite rightly, quite appropriately. That was a mistake. But you just cannot square this circle that she was wrong and he's right. And here's the other point. If you don't like Morrison as Prime Minister, if you regret that he won the election, if you wish Labor had won, but you're saying you want him back in the country to deal with this, you are demonstrating the opposite of politicising the tragedy. I'm one of those people. I wish Labor had won the election earlier this year. But despite that wish that didn't come true, I am not taking the attitude of, well, I don't like Morrison and I think his influence as Prime Minister is bad, therefore I welcome the fact that he's fucked off to Hawaii because now we don't have to deal with him and I hope he doesn't come back. I could take that view. I don't take that view because despite preferring that he's not Prime Minister, I understand that the country is above who is Prime Minister. That's more important. What I want to see at this stage, more than anything else, is for the country not to burn to the ground and for people not to die. And I will not say, just because my Prime Minister isn't who I wish it was, that therefore I am glad that he is ineffectual and not doing anything. Alright? I know that the country not burning up matters first, and I am willing to have a Prime Minister who I wish wasn't Prime Minister do stuff to make that happen and to protect the country from that. That necessarily means pointing out that it's a problem when he goes on holiday at a time like this. If that's the stance you're taking, the stance that the Prime Minister should be doing stuff and having an influence even if you wish he wasn't the Prime Minister, That is the patriotic stance. That is the stance of loving your country, not wanting to see it burn to the ground and not wanting to see your fellow citizens die, right? So for right-wingers to say things like, well, this proves that you're unpatriotic and that you don't love the country because you're just politicizing the issue, it shows what right-wing patriotism is so often about. Right-wing patriotism is so often about loyalty to the one leader, as long as it's the leader that they like. It's not about wanting good outcomes for the country. It's if the leader is a right-winger, defend them and protect them at all costs, even if the country would be worse off for it. So I'll finish on this note. I don't care if you've listened to everything I say and all the reasons why I said it's a bad time to have a holiday and all the things he could have done more effectively if he stayed in the country. If you disagree with all of that, I don't care. I don't look upon you any worse for it. It doesn't bother me at all. We should be allowed to disagree without getting at each other's throats. But here's the real problem. If you've heard all of those points about why it was a bad idea, about him being paid as much as he is with taxpayer money, about what leadership entails, about all of the things he could have done more effectively that Van Badham pointed out if he'd stayed in the country, about what the emergency leaders for climate action are saying needs to happen at a national level to make this threat less dangerous, if you've listened to all of those points and you still think that the only reason that someone could take the view that Morrison made a mistake in having a holiday is out of politics and out of a desire to embarrass him rather than out of a desire to protect the country, then you are utterly brainwashed.